Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer, and I'm with CUGC HQ, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's CUGC User Share. We are welcoming 3 CTPs to the webinar stage today. We have Steve Greenberg. He is a CTP fellow, and he is with the Phoenix CUGC group. We also have Theresa Miller. She's a CTP and frequently participates with both Madison and Milwaukee CUGC groups. And finally, all the way from Australia, we have Aaron Parker, also a CTP, and with the Melbourne group. And I believe Aaron was also involved with our newest group down there, the Sydney group. Before we jump into today's presentation, which isn't really a presentation, it's a different format for us at CUGC today, want to just go over our format. This will be held in a debate format. All 3 of our speakers will provide a short summary of their position, and then each speaker will have 6 minutes to elaborate on their argument. Following each segment, the other speakers can question the argument that was presented, and then after all of that, we're going to turn things over to you guys to type in your questions for live Q&A. So before we even do that, I have one quick poll for you guys to get us started. So I'm going to throw that up for you right now. And that is, what is the future of Windows? So please select your answers, what you think the future of Windows is going to be. I'll give you about 15 seconds more. Looks like about half of you voted. Another couple seconds. It looks like we're tying here. All right, close the poll out now. And I'll share the results so that everyone can see. So it looks like we have about 47% desktops and workloads to public cloud, 42% virtualized Windows on premises, with only 11% deploying Windows to physical PCs. All right, there you go. Theresa, Steve, and Aaron. I think that's the information you needed to get started with. So I'm going to hand things right over to you guys to get started with your positions.
Sounds great. Thank you, Stephanie. So my name's Theresa Miller, as she had mentioned, and I'm a CTP Microsoft MVP and VMware vExpert. And I have the boxing gloves on, and I'm ready to, talk about this topic of where the future of the workstation might be. And in terms of my topic, I went with the future belongs to cloud. In summary, some of the things that really stand out to me that we often don't think about are how the user experience can be impacted in a business continuity disaster recovery scenario. So that is one of the positions that I'm going to be taking today. And then the other angle is I see a lot of organizations talking about getting out of the PC business. They're letting organizations they're letting users bring their own PCs to the enterprise. And so I see cloud fitting into that very nicely.
It's my turn. Oh, looks like I've got my work cut out for me at 11%, right? This will be fun. Right.
Good luck, buddy.
So, right, I'm Aaron Parker. As Stephanie said, yes, I'm a CTP from, I'm going to say sunny Melbourne, because it looks like it's going to be a nice day here. I'm coming into bat for the PC. So this is going to be a tough crowd if I've only got 11%. So I guess my position is that Microsoft and certainly OEMs, I think, have changed the game somewhat in terms of Windows on physical PCs. From a Microsoft perspective, there's certainly been a rapid pace of innovation in terms of Windows. The development and release of Windows since the original release in 2015 has certainly changed things quite a bit. I think we've seen almost 6 releases since then. providing a whole lot of new features and new capabilities, especially in terms of how we manage that PC and secure it. On top of that, applications are changing, so we're eventually starting to see a change or re-architecture of applications as they move from legacy style Windows applications and make those available across the web and be able to deliver those locally, even when the back end might be a long away from the device. Those devices now are becoming much more personal. Users, the type of device that they're looking for, the type of experience that they want, the way that they work with the PC, I think has certainly changed. And just generally, look and feel of Windows 10 PC now is much better than it used to be. Just on a level of sort of looking at the way that I work with the actual PC, visually it looks fantastic, and I think that's sort of hard to deliver in that same type of experience is hard to deliver in a remote session.
Excellent, Aaron. I know as an Australian, you like to do a comeback, so that 11% I know you'll take as a challenge. So I'm Steve Greenberg, and I'm going to take a slightly different position today. While I appreciate these new modes of delivery and actually use them and recommend them with my clients, I still see the majority of workloads and environments really don't need to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. There's a tendency in the industry for when there becomes a new deployment option to say everyone should do it all the time. And I'm going to speak at length about what ain't broke today, and probably what we can maintain that we spent 20+ years mastering, and then look for opportunities for to go beyond from there. So Theresa, you're up for the first 6-minute segment. So I'm going to let you go, but first I'm going to set a timer to keep us all honest.
Sounds good. Sounds great. I love the images you both had. I love that that sunglasses kid in the car. Although I have very cool imagery here, I really love those.
Well, you belong to the future, so we'll hand it over to you to take us into the future, and I'll start the timer now.
All right, let's go future. So in terms of future, I want you to start thinking about a couple of questions. So if you are a leader, what are you going to want your teams and employees in IT working on? That's one of them. And taking that a step further, how are you going to encourage them to secure it? And do you want them maintaining infrastructure? So those are some of the pieces and questions that I think are forefront for cloud. What do you want your team working on? So my goal for this part of our debate is to get you thinking differently about cloud. I know that some organizations are very anti-cloud, and some of that's political, whereas other things are not. Also, keep in mind there are some really great options available today. Cloud options for workstations have matured a lot over the past several years, and we can be looking at things such as Citrix Essentials, Citrix Cloud, and there were some new announcements recently where in Azure, you're able to do multi-user Windows 10, at least soon. It's not quite released yet. And you have Citrix announcing a similar offering, DAS related, for Windows 10. So in what situations does shifting the endpoint to the cloud really make sense, considering all of these new things that are coming at us and some of the things that I've already mentioned? Well, one that stands out to me is availability. When you are working with users on their endpoints and there is a deployment, we'll talk a little bit about this, I think in Aaron's segment, but what happens when a push goes out that's bad to a Windows 10 workstation? Or what happens if disaster recovery becomes front and center? And right now there's an active hurricane down on the Gulf. What happens to those businesses? How are they going to keep functioning? And so when you consider cloud for the endpoint, it really means that it doesn't matter which device I have, I can always get at my desktop. And I think that that is a very powerful consideration, no matter what's going on, whether it's a hurricane, fires, and we've seen it all. How am I going to get to that endpoint? So if your workstations are in the cloud and there is something going on, the piece that really keeps your users functioning is their workflow. So we've got this business continuity interruption of service. And let me throw one more concept out there. It could be as simple as a fire alarm going off in your building. And maybe the fire department came and they're not going to let you back in there for hours. Now you have to go home. So if I have a workstation in the cloud and I have to go home, my PC is stuck at my desk, I now can get at that same endpoint, the same way I've been accessing it every day to do my job. And I think that is extremely important and powerful for the user. You're empowering them to do their job no matter what's going on in the enterprise or in the world around them. So the final point that I want to talk to you about now revolves around cloud architecture. And there are three different perspectives here. First, there's the administrator, and I touched on this briefly already. What do you want your employees working on? How about you as an administrator? What do you want to be working on? Do you want to be maintaining hardware and infrastructure, worrying about security? Security breaches are front and center everywhere. Wouldn't it be great to let the cloud providers that are really excellent at doing this manage that piece of the equation? So cloud architecture for administrators, while there may be some learning curve, it does eliminate some of those things that keep us working nights and weekends and give us potentially sleepless nights. The other perspective, the next one, is user perspective. So once the architecture is in place, they learn their workflow. So I'm reiterating the business continuity piece. They know their workflow. They know no matter where they're working, no matter what's going on, nothing changes. They can still do their job. And then finally, for the business, the gain of using cloud really comes around stability, predictability, and there's now no longer need for continual maintenance of infrastructure. And let's leave those security challenges behind us as well. Let's leave them up to the cloud providers. So 13 seconds to go, and that is my stance on why we should be considering cloud.
Wow, you beat your time too. Excellent. Well, this is the point in our debate format where we can ask each other a couple of quick questions before the next speaker goes. So I'll start, Theresa, by just saying I love all the benefits you're describing, but it seems pretty universal to understand now that cloud actually costs more and can be more complicated. Do you think the benefits you're describing outweigh those factors?
So I would agree with it can cost more. Considerations there really revolve around how long you're going to leave that endpoint online. So you can actually put power management in place behind the scenes to power up and power down machines. So if you know that your workers are typically offline, you can power those down so that they're not consuming additional resources that you may not want to. Cloud is an operational expense, so it no longer is capital. And I think accountants kind of like that a little bit. Businesses like the operational aspect of that as well. But yeah, I can't promise that it will be cheaper, but you're definitely going to save on the time that goes into maintaining. And then it goes back to the question I asked, what do you want your people working on? And it oftentimes, that the answer to that question makes cloud, even the cost of it, more compelling.
I knew this wasn't going to be easy working with you guys. So Aaron, do you have any questions for Theresa?
Yeah, so the thing with cloud that I always find a challenge trying to get customers say, they want to journey to the cloud, they say it's going to solve all my problems, is that they need to bring a lot of maturity into their processes, the way they manage this. Probably, I think, feeds directly into Steve's question. I don't think the problem is so much the cloud. To be able to reduce costs, you need maturity in process. How does IT solve that one?
Yeah, so, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that even kind of ties into automation, right? In terms of maturity of processes. Okay. So I personally, day in and day out, work in an environment that allows me to get to test that out. So there's an on-prem environment, but there's very much a cloud environment as well. And automation, as long as the cloud provider you're working with has the right APIs, you can absolutely mature those processes. You can even integrate them with service desk tools like ServiceNow, where you can create orderable items for users that will spin up your servers. If that, and we do that for certain users in our enterprise today. So as long as you're willing to learn some PowerShell and work to learn a little bit of, like, for example, in my example, it was the ServiceNow component, but learn a little bit more about how those systems can work together, you can absolutely do this, and it can really, really increase efficiency across the board as you move into the cloud.
Well, excellent. So now I'm going to hand it over to Aaron to tell us how it is that Windows is cool again. And if you're ready to start, Aaron, I'll go ahead and start the timer.
We have to work out what this generation is going to be called, hey, with this guy.
Right, you're up.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think in the past number of years, as I said in my introduction, there has been some changes in Windows, of course, and certainly in the actual PC itself. So if we look at what Microsoft has been doing with the Surface, Microsoft has produced a device. I think it's fair to say they've certainly had to step in and show what the PC can actually be. And I think they've certainly done that with the Surface line. They've been able to reduce a device that looks fantastic, is pretty powerful sort of device, comes in a number of different form factors. I think it's certainly a culmination of what Microsoft have been doing for almost like 15, almost 20 years, I could say. If we go way back to the original tablet PC, for example, now we can do this with Windows 10. The device becomes something that is flexible for the user, allows them to work in different type of environments or different ways that they're working, whether say it's in a meeting or whether it's at their desk doing data entry or whatever it is, they can do it on a device that looks fantastic. And the OEMs themselves, so if you look at, say, what HP, Lenovo are delivering, they've taken what Microsoft have done and then built on top of this. This device, this is a crazy device in that it's actually wrapped in leather. So, something for the executives, of course, but Microsoft has shown what the PC can be. OEMs have responded and picked up their game. And now we have PC devices that are, as I say, come in a lot of different form factors, light, chuck it in the bag if I need to leave or go to a meeting or do whatever I'm doing. I'm on the plane. I'm not lugging something that's pretty heavy, and pretty easy to these days to find a device that is certainly pretty powerful. So if we look at why Windows is cool again, we've got a number of points. First one is that we can now manage Windows, certainly Windows 10, I should say, with no infrastructure. I don't need to deploy anything on-prem. I can use cloud services, whether it's something like Microsoft Intune or Citrix Cloud, for example. I can manage Windows 10 without actually deploying any infrastructure, which allows me to provision devices over the air. So I can take a device from the OEM, I can ship it to the user. The end user can take the machine out of the box. IT's never had to touch that device, and the user can enroll in that device. You can even get to a point where the user will open the boot the PC, and they've already got their email address or the username in the device. All they have to do is put in their password. You can even go a step further, and they can go completely passwordless and just respond to the authenticator on their phone and log straight into their device and get their applications. So that means IT doesn't have to worry about managing an SOE. That device then becomes an evergreen device. So I can provision the device over the air, as I said, but I can deploy updates over the air. Applications are changing the way that they're doing deploying and doing updates, so those applications become evergreen. The user gets new features in a timely manner, take care of new capabilities in the device, as well as new applications and so on. Those applications are changing somewhat. I think it's certainly fair to say that we're going to see these legacy Windows applications around for a long time, but that will change. So we'll end up being able to do spending less time doing packaging, because we can use things like Microsoft Store applications and progressive web apps. So vendors or third-party vendors, I guess, are changing the way that they're delivering applications. Even Citrix has done this with Citrix Workspace, for example. I can deliver Workspace from the store. So as an administrator, I can subscribe to Workspace. I can target the users or devices I want to deliver it to, and I've never had to download anything or package anything. From a device perspective, or from IT and business, I'm worried about the applications and data that they can get access to. From an IT point of view, what Windows 10 and managing that over the air means is that I'm worried about compliance of the device. I'm not really worrying about policies that I need to push out to get it to a certain state. So whether the user is in control of that device or IT is largely in control of it, I'm more interested in, is the user accessing my applications and data from a compliant device? So is the user who they say they are? Is the device in a state that is ready to and secure to access my applications? So is AV up to date? Does it have encryption and so on? Compliance is certainly key in this type of scenario. Because I'm provisioning that device over the air, because I'm just worried about compliance of that device and not worried about policies that I'm pushing out to it, that means I can secure and manage that device regardless of the location. It doesn't matter to me whether the user and that device is inside the network or at home or in a cafe or traveling somewhere. I'm going to be able to have the user enroll the device, be able to push out compliance policies to it and configuration policies and applications and updates the same way. I don't have to worry about, is the device inside the network or outside the network, and shift the way that I manage the device. That then gives me the ability to push all of my data center, my meat and potatoes back into the data center and secure what's inside it. So finally then...
your time is up. Once again, I got my competitions cut out for me here. If I can go ahead and present, let me stop this from beeping. Sure. The first question, I mean, the sound of a leather-wrapped magic box with no infrastructure is amazing. I'll take one. In fact, I'll take two. But I have to ask, I still talk to customers today who, they're using, System Center or whatever tool, and they still have like a 10 or 12% failure rate when they go to push something, to a large environment, and that's on the LAN. So, with magic leather wrapped boxes circling the globe, connected from anywhere at any time, what the hell, how is that going to work?
Can I distract the user with a leather wrap case or magnesium or aluminium device that just looks fantastic? Look, hey, look how great this device is. Let me swap it out and give you a new one because all your data has been synchronized up to the cloud. I give you a new device and all the applications push back out to it. I think Windows 10, if it's managed correctly, now has new capabilities to do rollbacks. And the administrator can initiate that over the air as well. And if I've deployed it right, as I say, I can, all the user has that device and they've been able to make it a little bit more personal. I think they get a better experience. I can still swap that device out with another device and get the user up and running fairly quickly. I think it's IT. We're going to have failures and we need to account for failures somehow. I think we just need to build that into the way that we architect our solutions and manage devices.
Okay.
All right, so I have a question for you, and I thought maybe we would talk about it a little bit, but since we didn't get much of a chance to, I do want to bring up the whole Windows 10 version debacle that happened recently. And I've seen some users and administrators speak up about how the user data was there, but they basically had to rebuild machines. So I guess I'm curious. I know you talked about a rollback option maybe from the cloud, but what's your take on how this type of situation can really impact the user base and still allow us to move forward with PCs in the enterprise?
Yeah, it's certainly a good one, isn't it? Because Microsoft have changed the way that they are developing and testing Windows. And previously it was behind closed doors. A Windows release would come out and it largely wouldn't change for, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, whatever it is. Windows 7 is going to be the new Windows XP. But Windows 10 has far more rapid releases. I think in this particular instance, you've seen that Microsoft are changing the way that testers are able to report issues. And apparently the failure rate for this is something like 0.0001%. So an issue like this, well, as far as what I can tell, at least in what Microsoft is saying, is while it certainly gets a lot of visibility and focus, the number of people who have actually been affected is extremely small. But it doesn't negate the need for IT to test things. So Microsoft talks a lot about Windows as a service, in that we, as IT, are testing upcoming releases, testing brand new releases as they come out on only specific machines, and then once we're happy, then roll it out to the rest of the population. So yes, there are issues, but it doesn't negate the need for us to continue our process in terms of testing applications and operating systems before we deploy them.
I think that's a really great point, because Microsoft does allow enterprises to control if an update or when an update goes to a user. So having the right people in that test ring is critical. So that's an excellent point. Good.
Good.
Yep.
Okay, we'll move on to the next section, which is basically, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm going to start my own timer here. Okay, the idea is these technologies are fantastic. It reminds me of a really bad dad joke my dad used to tell. Why do you want to drive in a $30,000 car when you can be in a $500,000 bus? It sounds great, but you'd rather drive in your own car that you can control, that works the way you're used to and the way you know how to, operate. And there's also kind of the thing that nobody really wants to mention, which is when I go into enterprise, which is pretty much every day, we count hundreds of applications, tens of which have databases and custom code that nobody's even worked there for 10 years, who knows how to do anything with it. And when we talk about moving to the cloud, that's great, but I can't pick up the user's client application, whether it's their desktop or a published app, and now stick a wide area network between that and the data. So many times it comes back to just keeping the apps close to the data, which is one of the things that really, drove Citrix into the market in the early days. Is companies were all spread out all over the place, and you're trying to run these client server apps. We used to call it client server, thin client server-based computing, because we were dealing with these client apps. So there's a big dynamic of being close to your data, which leads to this, and for other reasons, the best performance you can control. You can check your network, you can debug it, you can add CPUs at will, you can buy new servers when and how you need to, and you also get to leverage your existing investment. Retooling to go up to cloud is pretty expensive, and you're not really reusing what you have, you're kind of undoing it in a lot of cases. A couple other compelling points I mentioned were how you really can directly intervene in your environment. And this kind of drove home for me when I had a problem with my own Citrix on Azure deployment. There were levels of support that I had to go through to get something resolved. It was far away. I couldn't walk up to the console. This particular machine had crashed in such a way that you can't get to their console utility. It just drove home to me that I can't necessarily intervene in situations that I normally expect to, the kind of failures that you're used to from on-site deployments. The other thing we found moving customers to cloud, and I do want to say that it's right for a number of people, so this isn't an absolute statement, but it's extremely complicated. It's viewed initially as VMs in the sky. Oh, great, look, I got VMs, I know what to do with those. But a public cloud architecture is a very, very deep, customized platform. Amazon is different than Azure and different than Google Enterprise. There's complexity built in that's there to make it simple for you, but you have to master a new art. You are not given a secure, well-designed data center when you start turning on VMs. You're given a blank slate that you have to really, it's like being given a blank data center, like you just built it. You have to configure networks and security, all the connections, ACLs and so forth, all have to be considered and in place before you deploy. And then once you get that wrapper, you have to now deal with how those elements communicate with each other in the outside world. And then now you're going over a whole other set of networks you didn't have to before, that maybe an express route or VPNs or custom things. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's cases where it's good, but it's really complicated. And it isn't just a lift and shift. In fact, the lift and shift mentality was lead to a lot of failures in cloud deployments, and you're seeing Microsoft try to address that now by doing things that are, so I'd say, slightly devious, like extending support for certain operating systems if you do them in the cloud. Well, why is that? Because you can't just pick it up and move it. You're going to need more time. And then on top of all of that, it costs more, and it's not that predictable. One of the promises is predictable recurring costs until you take out your credit card, swipe it, start building, and you say, holy crap, that bill was 2-3 times what I expected. Now there are ways to remediate that, but I haven't really seen anybody be able to go to the cloud and save money. That's just not really part of the discussion. And I think those are my main points, guys. I'm going to give you back a minute. Do you have any questions for me?
Nice. Yeah, definitely. I do. So my question for you really goes back to the heart of on-prem infrastructure. So if I were to maintain my Citrix environment or my virtualization environment completely on-prem and choose not to do any cloud, what do you think the challenges of maintaining that infrastructure are?
Well, we know it's interesting. The main one is something Aaron brought up, questioning you. about cloud and maturity. Maturity and process is not optional in the cloud, right? So what I think challenges people to stay on-prem is to try to treat it like a cloud service and stop this insanity where you've got hundreds of apps and nobody knows about them, right? Or how to deploy them or update them. So it's really a challenge of better process. It's not what hardware you're running on and where you're running it, but it's, do you have the processes to service the business? And I think that's the same whether you're on-prem or going to the cloud. So why force it? Why don't you stay on-prem and improve your processes?
So just to add on to that question a little bit, so when I think about some environments I've crossed paths with over the years, and even in the more recent past, there are still organizations on-prem that haven't evolved their maturity / process. And I think that's what leaves us with unsupported environments on-prem. They're not willing to mature there as well. So do you think that going to the cloud could help force that hand a little bit? Because one of the main benefits of going to the cloud is versioning and keeping people up to date.
That's a great point. One of the things we do in our cloud practice is we tell customers we're not endorsing or even really allowing you to do that lift and shift I talked about, try to shoehorn your 2003 servers up there. So cloud can force a discipline, except I alluded this to my presentation. Microsoft's adding more and more like loopholes. Oh, well, if you come to the cloud, we'll support 2000 R2 even longer, right? We'll support Windows 7 even longer if you use our desktop. And I think it may enable the very problem that you're referring to.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. They do that, but they're still giving people a deadline. So it's encouraging people to come to the cloud, but there's still gonna be an end date. But that is an interesting point as well.
Well, and so is yours. So I think that's something that we'll have to watch and see. Does the cloud foster maturity and better processes, or is it just another way to enable throwing all your crap up there?
So they can make more money, because I mean, undoubtedly, oftentimes it is more expensive. Okay.
Hey,
thank you.
I dropped out. Hopefully I'm back now. Does that sound right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
We just got the internet here, so it's not stable. So was it my turn to ask the question?
It is your turn to answer a question. Like, you couldn't have come back at a more perfect time.
Brilliant. So yeah, hopefully my question's actually not going to stop over what you've just been talking about, because I've just missed the whole lot. Okay, so I'm gonna come back to somewhat with the question I was asking Theresa is around, and I did hear Steve, you mentioned this a little bit. How is, when we talk about process and automation and stuff and so on, and those sort of things are native in cloud offerings, whether it's cloud that Theresa's talking about, or whether it's managing devices with the cloud that I'm talking about, how does on-prem, so IT managing on-prem infrastructure, add value to the business if those sorts of tool sets are not native to on-prem?
That's a really interesting question, because I think it's fair to say they're not native. They would be add-ons or custom developed, right? Frameworks that you build or purchase into. However, it's not exclusive to the cloud. And that's one of the interesting things. If you just look at the actual definition, it's American, but National Institute of Standards defines cloud computing, as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and then it defines characteristics. None of them are location-based. There's nothing that prevents on-premise deployment from not being well managed or automated, right? It's a decision to do that. The part you probably missed was Theresa saying, a lot of organizations don't undergo that improvement, and so they're kind of stuck in old platforms and things that are unsupported. But there's really no reason you can't do it on-prem. And a perfect example would be something like Nutanix. When the cloud was new, you didn't have something like hyperconverged Nutanix, but now you do. It's using the same off-the-shelf hardware the cloud uses. It's using an excellent software platform. So my suggestion would be you just look at what do we want to accomplish and what's the best way to get there versus, oh, it has to be in the cloud.
Yeah, I need to align that with my purchasing cycles though, right? Whereas,
Yeah, which is another interesting thing. It probably should have been a slide point. All the vendors keep telling my customers, this is great because it's OpEx. And the vast majority of my customers go, why is that great? We want to spend capital. We don't want to be OpEx. So it's like the IT industry has decided how accounting works, right? Part of that is the economic cycles after the last Great Recession. It's become more of a, companies have built up capital. This gets into a whole other issue, but I don't think it's a given that switching to a subscription model is more beneficial for most companies.
yeah, fair enough, I think.
Okay, so I believe that winds up the each of our opening statements and our arguments and our peer questioning. So what we wanted to do is hand it back to Stephanie for a moment before we go into open Q&A and discussion. So think about your questions or things that you'd like to discuss in the meantime. And Stephanie, will hand it back to you for the poll.
Yep, I'm about to launch it right now. So now that you've heard everything, I'm going to ask you a similar question. You just have a couple more options this time. So we'll give you another 30 seconds to start getting your answers in.
And while they're working on it, Stephanie, it's probably fairly obvious that we all don't really disagree with each other.
Right.
We kind of had to take a position for the sake of the debate. There's elements of all these solutions that we all work on and provide. And I think, it's just important to find the right solution given the constraints or the goals.
I still want my leather-bound PC though.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That was pretty compelling. I'm sure it's going to take you at least from 11 to like 30% just on leather.
The other thing I wanted to add too, I mean, as you mentioned, Steve, I mean, we all could take an angle on any of these, and we deal with enterprises that take all of these angles too. And for us, it's more about what's right for that particular enterprise. It's not about which solution is right or wrong. Like you said, this was more about the debate format. So.
Sorry.
Well, this is
Can you all see the results?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
there you go.
So
And I
what's
think
interesting here is Aaron really didn't go down because more than one of the above got a third of the people, and all of the above got another third. So you have to admit that the majority believes that they'll use a combination, right?
Yeah, definitely. Most of the conversations I have with customers is their key word is they want to simplify. I think regardless of what they're doing.
Yep. Which solidifies what we were saying too. I think as people were watching and listening, hopefully they were comparing it to their enterprises and their politics, and they know what they know they have to deal with on-prem versus their cloud strategies. And I think that's where the shift came from.
Wonderful, guys. Well, I'd say let's open it up now to our friends who are listening, since it's been just us talking up until now. And I haven't been able to monitor the chat. Do we have audio questions, Stephanie, or should we just read the chat line?
Yeah, if you can just read them aloud, that would be great. Then we can get them on the recording. So if you can, I can read them to you, or if you want to scroll through. You can do
Well,
that.
the first two are awesome. Yo, Mr. Greenberg from Mike. Hey, Mike. Cool, baby.
I love that baby
Spelling on
picture
premises
too.
correctly. You're welcome. I've been chastised, so I've learned the hard way. This is way cool. Okay, and this is earlier on, obviously. David Prowse asked, why does it have to be one of the options versus all of the above? And I think that's really the question, right? It doesn't have to be, and it won't be. It's going to be hybrid in our world. So great question. I'm sure it came earlier. Okay, I'm going to throw this at Theresa because I should have thought of this when I was questioning you. From Andrew Hardiman, how are the challenges of legal and compliance and security impacting the cloud transition?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So my advice here is, well, one, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving you any legal advice per se. But what I do strongly recommend, whether you're doing cloud today or not, is to involve your legal team and your security team, because anytime you're making decisions around putting your data somewhere else, they need to be able to scrutinize what these cloud providers are telling you. Now, I did also mention that I think that they're doing a better job of securing those environments than I think in some cases we're capable of on-prem. And so, and that comes down to keeping up with updates and running the latest equipment and making sure the firewall rules are in place. So I actually think that legal and compliance and security are actually impacting the cloud transition in a positive way, just because I see the major cloud providers like your Amazons, your Microsoft, Google, IBM's, they're on top of this, and they have to be, because they're maintaining a liability for not only their environment, anyone who chooses to use the platform.
Great. This is an interesting one from Brian. You all have labs. How are the desktops that you use in them provisioned? And which do you prefer of those types? I'll go first because my situation is really illustrating this mixed thing. My lab's actually on hardware I own at a colo, and I run our production office, which is small, on Azure using Citrix. So, I don't use the cloud for labbing. I probably could, and maybe when this lab is end of life, I've already had it a few years. It's a super micro cloud, so there's 8 servers and pretty small form factor. But for me, it's lab on non-subscription and deploy on subscription. Obviously, you have to test in the cloud as well. What do you guys say to that?
So yeah, my lab is PC side's easy, right? The only device I don't really have actually is an Android device. I need to get one of those so I can test that. But I've got Macs, a whole lot of different Windows PCs, nothing leather bound, unfortunately. But I have a couple of PCs at home that I run as a lab because I have a domain controller that's on like 24/7 plus a couple of other things. And then I have a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, which gives me credit to use in Azure. And typically what's in Azure, I'm running up and doing what I need to do and then shut it down again. And I'm attempt to at least automate as 100% of what I do in Azure. So from a lab perspective, I have a script that'll run an environment up, and then when I'm finished with it, I just go and destroy it and get rid of it. So that kind of helps me then try and design production environments by taking a very similar approach, if you will.
Yeah. Mine is somewhat similar to yours. So of course, devices, although I have Windows 10, I even have a Windows 7 on the PC side. And then I'm kind of an Apple ecosystem on the devices. I do have a server with hypervisor on it that allows me to virtualize whatever I need, but I've almost just about abandoned it because I have to be, at least I never opened mine up to the outside world, and maybe that's something I needed to rethink, but I've pretty much abandoned that. I use it very minimally. I also have an Azure subscription with credits, and I do 99.9% of my lab work in the cloud. And it's portable, I can take it anywhere, and I can destroy it when I'm done. And I think that's the biggest challenge, at least for the lab stuff that I do. It seems like it's always a rip and replace on a regular basis. So that meets my needs pretty well.
And Theresa, I should have added in my lab, because I said I've got that domain controller, I've got hardware running like 24/7. It's just an Intel NUC, but I synchronize up to Azure AD. I'm using
Nice.
a lot of Microsoft type stuff, of course. So it's, there's Azure AD Connect syncing up, Intune, some Citrix Cloud type stuff. So I have some stuff that's kind of on all the time, but synchronizing up to the cloud. When I talk about deploying something in the cloud and turning it off, I'm talking about VMs or something that runs in there, or some other type of service that consumes my Visual Studio credits, which you get I get $200 Australian a month, and it's kind of, I don't want to see that tick down too much, but I do use a bit of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have power management on so many servers that I have up in the cloud. Typically don't erode at my credit value very heavily each month. So it works out. It works out very nicely.
Great. And then the two next questions, Evan asks about Citrix, what does Citrix licensing change going to the cloud? And I'll kind of combine it with how much of an enabler for transformation will Citrix Workspace be across all these delivery models, and that's Ben. And I'll ask you guys next, but I'll respond to that by saying, Citrix has multiple licensing models now that support them. And I think the big innovation for Citrix Cloud has been that it's a control plane. So they don't define where your workload is. So you can buy into a Citrix Cloud subscription and have your workloads be in any combination of on-prem or public clouds or anywhere. And I think that's a really great enabler for letting you move in that direction, but not throw out your on-prem investment right away. And then as far as Workspace, it still kind of has to shape up, but Citrix's Workspace, as they describe it as an authentication point and an aggregator, is very flexible. So it actually can be the single pane of glass into all these models. You can have SaaS apps next to apps maybe running in Azure. I have a customer we're going to actually do this with, which I'll admit now that we're out of the debate portion, that's actually going to have on-prem Azure and AWS for very good business reasons. And Citrix Cloud will be the enabler that one subscription and one control plane will manage all of those locations. So I think that's actually a pretty powerful vision from Citrix. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
So the Citrix licensing piece, I can add a little bit to that. Definitely take time to work with either Citrix, or if you have a solutions licensing provider like a Software One or something that you buy licenses from, make sure you are working with them. But I find that overall, so there's like the cloud-based license, but you're still gonna need to be thoughtful of how you manage your server licensing, as well as RDS and I think Windows 10 is kind of an interesting aspect to that too. They expect you to kind of bring your licenses out of your local agreement. So I guess my advice on the licensing piece is it's not one size fits all. It depends on the solution that you're moving forward with, and it depends on the agreements you have in place with Microsoft as well today. So don't try and do it alone. Make sure you have the right people at the table to help you.
The other thing there, Theresa, is you have to watch very carefully, because what can be licensed and entitlement is changing. So like what does Server 2019 support? It may be different in relation to Office. There's a lot of questions about that. So you can't make assumptions going forward, like you're saying. Make sure you're talking to a Microsoft rep or a qualified agent for Microsoft, and be very specific about, I want to run this software on this operating system in this mode, because it will be different if you're doing Microsoft hosted VDI versus on-prem versus doing it in Azure. You know, even just between Microsoft's virtual desktop and putting your own desktop in Azure, the licensing will be different.
Yep. And your licensing doesn't include like Azure costs for machines being online. So make sure that you don't forget to consider that too if you're trying to price out a project.
Steve, what was the second question?
In Workspace?
Yeah, what was the second question?
It was about the role of Workspace as enabling transformation. Will Citrix allow you to do that with Workspace across these different delivery models?
Yeah. So yeah, the licensing question, I'll avoid that one. But interestingly, Citrix Cloud does a couple of things that look pretty interesting. One, of course, is managing Windows 10 PCs. So what used to be called Zen Mobile, I guess, has pretty interesting capabilities. You know, I fair to say I work primarily with Microsoft Intune, but Zen Mobile does more operating systems than Intune, so I can do Windows 10 and plus a whole heap of others. So I can manage physical PCs. And then from a workspace perspective, I can manage SaaS-based or deliver SaaS-based applications sort of in a secure container inside Workspace on a physical PC. So that kind of functionality sounds pretty appealing to me.
Hey, Aaron, if I can interrupt for 1 second, I know Theresa has a hard stop on the hour.
Yeah.
Can you stay a little longer? We'll continue
Yeah.
to. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Theresa. You almost convinced me to go to 100% cloud.
It has to be part of the conversation anyways, right? It's an interesting topic. So, well, good. I'm so glad to have done this with you guys today. It was a blast. I love when we can get together and do presentations. And if anything comes up after the fact that would be better suited for me to answer, feel free to just send that off to me in email and let me know how to follow up with the person.
On the screen are our Twitter tags, and what we didn't show was EUC Queen, which Theresa is running, which is everybody must subscribe to. It's amazing tips for EUC from the very. She just goes out to all the best people and gets their 140 biggest lesson, 140 character biggest lesson. So EUC Queen, Theresa, we'll let you drop because I know you have a hard stop.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Aaron,
Theresa.
Yep.
Take care. Aaron, if I could go back to that for a second, because I know one of your many expertise is this Windows 10 on public cloud with Intune and Azure-based services. What would you say to a Citrix customer who maybe owns Zen Mobile today and is looking at these things? Like, you know, when do you use Zen Mobile? When do you use Intune? And is there some merger? Because Microsoft and Citrix keep talking about how they work together.
Yeah, that's a good question because as I say, I work with Intune more than I do with Zen Mobile, but I would, and it's driven, I think, by customers, right? It's, we got to go and deliver the solution that the customer wants.
Right.
Yeah, there's some capabilities that Zen Mobile has to extend what Intune can do, especially around VPNs, so integration with NetScaler, and so on. And you know, and there's a lot of those workspace application things, well, workspace and some others that can be managed by Intune, so that in the other direction. But from a purely technical point of view, as I was saying previously, is that Zen Mobile can manage more operating systems than Intune can. You know, Google Chrome is a good one. Thinking about physical devices, it's interesting to hear stories about the inroads that Chromebooks are making, even in things like financial institutions and so on. So those types of devices seem to be pretty appealing to business in that I can lock them down, I can treat them somewhat like a thin client, if you will, and then I can manage them with something like Zen Mobile. And then, of course, Zen Mobile, you know, if Citrix Cloud or Citrix toolsets are strategic to the customer and they're delivering Zen Apps and Desktop, you know, they're a NetScaler customer or MAS or any of those sorts of things, why not be adding Zen Mobile on top of that and managing it all through a sort of a single portal, if you will.
Well, unfortunately, it's the same "it depends" answer because it really depends on the requirement and the tools you have. Sounds like Zen Mobile is going to be broader platform support, but maybe not as rich for Windows 10, and so you'd have to choose.
No, definitely rich enough for Windows 10. I think it's really is how strategic is Citrix in your business.
Okay.
Having said that, any Citrix customer, I think, in the next whatever years is going to end up having a lot of that Microsoft licensing anyway, just by virtue of the feature sets and how it's bundled. So any Citrix customer, I think, is going to be able to say, well, do I do Intune or do I do Zen Mobile? And as I say, how strategic is Citrix to you? Do you want to manage it all through Citrix Cloud instead of multiple consoles? But most Citrix customers, I think, are going to be able to have the ability to do either.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, if anybody has a challenge with that, reach out to Aaron. We are over the hour. We're happy to stay longer and continue to speak. I just want to recognize and respect people's time if they need to go. And I'll move on to Thorsten Elmer's question or comment. It is also a cause of trust. Do we trust in these times where governments just overrule the law or just change the law? Aaron and I are probably not great guys to talk about law, but it's a consideration because if the law changes and you're in the cloud, what does that mean? It could mean just about anything. There's been definitely changes in privacy in Europe. I just heard of one, I think it was this week, where the laws change where Netflix has to provide a certain amount of local content in Europe, which is great, but all of a sudden the law changes and it has to respond. So I'm not a lawyer, I can't comment on it, but definitely something to think about. Do you have any thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, I think I'm sort of similar boat. I think sort of cloud, maybe this isn't just about my infrastructure or my organization's infrastructure that I go and move to a cloud service. I'm probably going to consume some sort of third-party service that is hosted in some cloud or some platform somewhere. How much control do I have over that? I know I'm buying. My relationship is with that software vendor. It's not necessarily with the cloud platform that it's sitting on. Something I did see. Yeah. Something I did see interesting. Apparently, Google is no longer bidding for that 10 billion Pentagon cloud contract.
Really?
Was that correct? I think so. I don't know whether other vendors are doing the same thing, but my understanding of the situation is that within Google, their employees were saying, no, we don't, I'm paraphrasing terribly here, but we're not comfortable with you, with Google, my employer, well, not me personally, but that Google employee saying we're not comfortable with you bidding for this contract for whatever reason. I can't remember what it was, and apparently Google's pulling out of that contract. That's a pretty big contract to sort of pull out of.
Yeah, that's definitely above our pay grade, but great question, and hopefully that helped a little bit. Our friend Brad Myers is got a great question. What are the biggest challenges facing organizations in the next 5 years as they move to these hybrid type solutions with on-prem and cloud? Outages occur for both, that's real. How can we build that redundancy in the best way? I think this is an incredibly good question. Because after you get through all the complexity of migration, maturing your processes, automating, having all these network connections, managing it all, you're going to ask this question because something's going to go down. And I'll just throw out one of the things the industry is saying. I don't know that it's really sufficient or addresses it, but our various SD-WAN, software-defined WAN solutions. I know we do this in our consulting practice by designing across multiple data centers and using very sophisticated features of storage arrays and Citrix, which is great at active-active solutions. But when you start to mix this into cloud and multi-cloud, it's going to get complicated. Any thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, so I think at the moment, for a lot of organizations, they're in a situation where their first entry into, I hate saying it, but the cloud, or Azure or AWS or Google, whatever it is just a lift and shift project. There's typically, I think the drivers for that have been, I've got hardware server renewal or end of life coming up. Rather than going out and buying a whole lot of new hardware, I just want to go and get my infrastructure into the cloud, and that first step is just a lift and shift, because I can't just immediately go from on-prem into some maturely managing cloud services as a replacement for my on-prem data center. So I need to do a lift and shift, and then as I'm doing that, I'm learning what the cloud providers can give me. So we talk about things like automation that are built natively into those platforms, and I need to mature my processes to take advantage of that, so then I can go and re-architect a lot of my applications. But then there's some applications or workloads I'm never going to be able to re-architect, right? So
right. But why do that rather than just look for the workloads that are good candidates for the cloud and do those first?
Well, as I say, certainly one example I'm thinking of is that my entire, not a large organization, but their entire data center, their hosts for that are end of life. So they'd have to go and replace the whole lot. And we're not thinking about the workloads. It's I've got storage and server hardware end of life, and I need to do something about it.
That makes perfect sense. Actually, the customer I referred to with the multiple clouds, that's why they're doing this. They have a significant investment in Oracle hardware and licenses, and to just rebuy that capital just doesn't work. And they're a government agency, state level, that's being mandated to go to the cloud. So there's the business reason, right? The money, that organization does want to go to OpEx and is saying move to cloud, so they're not going to go out and buy millions of dollars of hardware. So it's a good example.
Yeah, I've actually got another customer who is the other way. They are going through a data center refresh, and they haven't been able to justify moving all their workloads to the cloud. They're pretty much a 99% XenApp shop across sort of actually the entirety of Australia. So I think their data centers here in Melbourne, and they deliver the user's primary desktop through XenApp across Australia. They need to refresh storage and compute. It's a law firm, but they live in email. And so I went through this exercise with them as, okay, yeah, I think you're thinking, Mr. Customer, your thinking is valid in that it probably makes sense for you to stay on-prem, but you should think about email. I don't see any reason why, and they had some particular performance issues with Exchange that they had to scale out the number of servers that they had to try and get good enough performances. That to me seemed like a great candidate. Move email to Office 365 and don't worry about that component and leave the rest of it on-prem.
Yeah, that's great. So that's right sizing, right? Looking at the workload and determining.
Yeah.
Hey, we're about 10 minutes after the hour, and we still have 66 people, so I'm good for a little longer. Aaron, can you go a little longer?
Yeah, I got another 5 minutes.
Okay, so we'll go for 5 more minutes. We'll get through as much as we can. VJ's commenting, every enterprise has their standard image with packaged apps. Do cloud vendors support custom images, or we take whatever image the vendor offers in their catalog? That's a great question. I'd love to hear what Aaron says. My first thought is it really depends on what you mean by cloud and which services. So like Amazon workspaces, you can't give them an image, right? But if you rent space at Azure, you can put your images up there. And this gets into understanding the control plane versus the hosting platform. And this is where Citrix Cloud, I think, is so strong, is they're taking a control plane approach where we'll put all the brokering, database, communications, proxying into a service, and you put the workloads wherever you want. And so in that regard, you put them where you can put your custom images, whether it's on-prem or any number of public clouds. but the kind of most of the hosted desktops to date do not accept your image. I believe the new ones coming from Microsoft and Citrix did talk about providing your image. Is that your understanding, Aaron?
Yeah, I guess it's any option for those vendors that has an image that they manage is going to be pretty simple. It's going to include Windows and Office and most of the fairly standard off-the-shelf type applications, isn't it? As soon as you start thinking about customizing that image, you have to deal with complexities of application versions, custom configurations for that application. Worked with a number of sort of smaller MSPs who provide that type of service, and that's always a challenge. So any of the big players, I think you're going to get sort of fairly basic options. Doesn't stop you from going and building your own and managing that yourself, whether it's inside something like Azure, AWS, and maybe sort of the mid-tier players is where you get more of that customization, but you'll see that reflected in the cost of the service.
Very good. I'm going to move forward because we have 2 more questions. We can probably get you out in time. So from Bert, we have, if you're going to cloud-only desktop, how are you going to handle your apps and data? Leave them on-prem or transfer them to the cloud too? Or combining a cloud desktop with application publishing construction, like combining Citrix Cloud with cloud desktop? Yeah, this is sort of a central question you have to ask. Definitely do not overlook this question in your organization, and just go back to basics. Where's the app? Where's the data? Where's the user? And determine based on that, where you can accept, WAN connections or distance or latency. There's a number of applications that can't have any latency, especially in financial, trading, medical, and others. So it may be that regardless of where you end up, the data has to be with the app. So the government agency I mentioned, the Oracle, is going to go to AWS. So we're going to use Citrix Cloud to have a control plane that can handle any resource location. And we're going to put the Oracle applications in Amazon, fronted by a browser, hosted on Citrix sessions in Amazon. But other apps are going to be in Azure because that's their target platform for their Windows workloads. So in that case, we're using Citrix Control Plane to manage multiple locations, and we're actually putting Citrix servers or VDI right next to the data. So great question, Bert. You have to deal with that and determine that. And it's one of the dynamics where it might mean stay on-prem. Like Aaron was talking about the law firm that, wanted to go to cloud, but the thing that really needed it was email versus perhaps other applications. And do you have anything to add to that one, Aaron?
No, that's exactly what you've said there. You've got to consider the application and the data, right? Move to the right location, dependent on the architecture.
Yeah, so we work together sometimes. Aaron and I already have some of the same thoughts. The final question is from Chris Wallace, and how does the service like WorkSpot fit into this? And I'm not going to comment because I'm really not familiar with their architecture, although I know people that work there I like very much. I remember early in their life cycle, they talked about providing the management for these workloads, but they could be on-prem, and today I don't know if it's focused on that or also cloud. Do you know more about them, Aaron?
Not so much the architecture, I guess, but this is like any of those cloud desktop providers. Interesting that Frame was purchased by Nutanix. Citrix doesn't really offer anything similar, but that's the decision that they've made, which to me is pretty sound. So WorkSpot, I guess, is filling a specific niche where customer wants to, I need a Windows desktop. I don't want to have to go and manage it. I don't want to manage PCs, so I just need to get some sort of Windows as a service from a cloud provider such as WorkSpot.
Right.
And back to the custom applications and custom image option. That is a tough question. And if you want to customize it, I think you just end up paying for a specific tier that allows you to have that option customized. You know, maybe there are newer solutions to customizing applications inside those. So where we might have used AppV previously, maybe those types of vendors like things like WorkSpot might be either providing their own methods of simplifying getting applications into those images, or they go and use some of the other type of application virtualization vendors or layering solutions and so on to make it easier to get the apps in there.
I'll add a clarifying comment that we can close on, which is just to understand there's a number of different entities. So we all, you know, if you're on this call, you probably understand the traditional Citrix enterprise product that is essentially runs on premises, and you buy perpetual software and pay maintenance. Now, Citrix also has Citrix Cloud and subscription versions of that, so you can start to consume it as a subscription and/or put your management control plane for your Citrix environments up in the cloud. Then there's the idea of having hosting space in the cloud, like you go to Azure or AWS and put servers and domain controllers and workloads. And then there's the idea of a hosted desktop. When you cross over into the hosted desktop is when you kind of get where Aaron's describing those limitations and service levels. And then one further clarifying things, if we're not confused enough yet, is Microsoft announced its virtual desktop service at Ignite, and Citrix simultaneously announced that they will support that with their stack on top of it. So in the coming months, I don't know what we can say publicly, but watch in 2019 for hosted offerings from Microsoft and Citrix, which complicate this a little further because then you have to understand what can you customize or not in those environments. And with that, I just want to thank Stephanie and Aaron and all the people attending. We still have 58 people. Thanks for being hardcore and staying longer. You can always feel free to reach out to us at the handles on the screen. We love to talk about this. And I'll hand it over to Stephanie to close us out.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Aaron. And thanks, everyone, for staying on and for attending today. Just want to wrap up with a couple of quick things. I threw a couple of links in the chat for everyone. There's a link to a discussion thread at the CUGC website, and if you have more questions, you can certainly keep on talking and discussing today's webinar there. And also there's a short survey. It's quick, it's anonymous, and it's for CUGC use only. It helps us get future content for webinars and blogs and everything that we have for you out at CUGC. So please fill that out for us. And finally, we just want you to come on out to mycugc.org and find your local group if you haven't done so already, and get involved. Go to a local meeting, check out our discussion forums, our blog posts, and our upcoming webinars. There's lots of things out there for you guys. And make sure you follow us on Twitter at mycugc for all the latest information. And with that, I will let everyone get back to their day. Thanks again, Steve and Aaron, and thank you, Theresa, even though you're not here. Big thanks to the three of you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, I hope everyone has a great day. See you again at another CUGC webinar soon. Bye.